Wendigo, starving spirit haunting Native American tales. I felt it burning inside me, a hunger I couldn't stop, Jack Fiddler confessed. His hands stained with the blood of over a dozen victims he swore were possessed by Wendigos. Is this monster real, or a dark excuse for humanity's worst sins? Hit subscribe on Histories and Native Tales to find out. In the frost-bitten heart of Algonquin territory, where winters claw at the soul and starvation gnaws at the belly, a legend took root, a creature born not of flesh alone, but of something darker. The Wendigo, a name whispered around crackling fires, emerged in the folklore of the Algonquin people as a supernatural force, a shadow cast by hunger and greed. Picture a hunter, ribs pressing against taut skin, his eyes wild as the wind howls through skeletal trees. It wasn't me, he might mutter, trembling. It was the thing inside. For the Wendigo is no mere beast. It's a spirit, a parasite that slips into the mind, turning man into monster. Two faces of this terror stalk the tales. In the old stories, it shuffles forth as a walking corpse, emaciated, its skin clinging to bones like damp parchment, a stench of decay trailing behind. Elders would lean close, their breath fogging in the cold, and warn of a figure so gaunt, it seemed the earth itself had rejected it. Yet modernity has reshaped the nightmare. Now the Wendigo looms as a cunning fiend, its head crowned with the antlers of a stag, eyes glinting beneath a skull-like visage. A beast of the forest, yes, but one that hunts with a predator's guile. Which is truer, the rotting husk or the horned devil? Perhaps both, for the Wendigo thrives in the space between reality and dread. Its origins are as chilling as the winters that birthed it. The Algonquin knew a hard truth. A man could become a Wendigo. Not by curse or chance, but by choice. By surrendering to greed or, worse, tasting human flesh. Imagine a desperate soul, snow piling high around his lodge, his children's cries fading to silence. He reaches for the unthinkable, and in that bite, something shifts. The stories say he doesn't just eat, he transforms. His heart blackens, his hunger grows insatiable. These weren't mere ghost tales spun to scare the young. They were lessons etched in blood. Share your last morsel, a grandmother might hiss to her wide-eyed kin, or the Wendigo will claim you too. Moderation, restraint, these were the shields against its pull. But the Wendigo is more than a cautionary specter. It's a symbol, a mirror held up to humanity's decay. It embodies evil made manifest, a force that creeps in when balance falters. To the Algonquin, it was the outsider's taint, greed that hoards while others starve, violence that tears at the bonds of kin. Yet peel back the myth and a question lingers, is it truly a spirit or just us? Scholars argue it's a cultural artifact, a way to explain the unexplainable, cannibalism in famine, madness in isolation. Others scoff, insisting no spirit drives a man to such acts. The monster is his own making. Still, the Algonquin saw wisdom in their warning. Live humbly, honor the world, or risk becoming the very thing you fear. So the Wendigo endures, not just as a tale, but as a riddle. Is it a phantom of the wild, a literal beast stalking the snow, or a metaphor for the darkness we all carry, waiting for a harsh winter to set it free? The answer, like the creature itself, remains elusive, lurking just beyond the firelight. If the Wendigo's origins whisper of humanity's frailty, its power roars of a force unbound by mortal limits. Beyond the shadowed pines where Algonquin hunters once tread lightly, tales spread of a creature that defied the natural order. It moved with the wind's speed, silent, fleeting, a blur against the snow. A tracker might kneel, tracing its claw marks, only to straighten with a gasp as the trail vanished mid-step. "It was right here, then gone," he'd mutter, voice tight, his spear suddenly feeling like a child's toy. Its strength was no less fearsome. A single swipe could splinter a moose's spine or tear through a trapper's hide coat, as if it were paper. No snare held it, no blade struck true. The colder the night, the more invincible it seemed, as though the frost itself fueled its fury. Yet its terror lay not just in raw might, but in a hunter's cunning, owned across centuries. Through blizzards that blinded even the sharpest eyes, the Wendigo stalked with precision, sniffing out fear on the breeze. Its gaze cut through the dark, two glowing coals in a sea of black. And as the years piled high like snowdrifts, the stories grew grimmer. Elders claimed the oldest Wendigos bent nature to their will. Wolves howled at their command, ravens circled overhead, and the skies themselves darkened, snow falling thicker, winds shrieking louder, as if the creature summoned winter's wrath to cloak its hunt. Was this sorcery or exaggeration? Skeptics scoff, chalking it up to tales spun from terror. But on the longest nights, even doubters bolted their doors tighter. Then came the fever, Wendigo fever, a scourge as dreaded as the beast itself. Those touched by its shadow spoke of a fire igniting within, a searing heat that raced through their veins. "It's burning me alive," one man cried, clawing at his chest as if he could rip the hunger out. Sanity slipped away like smoke. Restraint crumbled under a tide of primal urge. Victims wandered the wilds, hollow-eyed, driven by a need they couldn't name, until they, too, became hunters in the night. Possession, or madness. Modern minds might label it a breakdown, trauma, or starvation snapping the psyche. To the Algonquin, it was the Wendigo's voice, a spirit weaving through flesh to claim its next host. And always, always the hunger. The Wendigo's curse wasn't mere survival. It was an endless void. Each meal sharpened the craving, a blade that cut deeper with every bite. It prowled ceaselessly, its skeletal frame a mockery of the feast it sought. Some tales painted it as a towering ice giant, swelling with every life it devoured, its footsteps shaking the frozen earth. "It grows," an elder might warn, voice low and steady, bigger with each soul it takes. Yet no matter its size, the hunger never dulled, a bottomless pit driving it to hunt until nothing remained. So the Wendigo's power endures, a blend of brute force and eerie dominion, a predator forged in desperation and fear. Is it a spirit mastering the wild, or a beast refined by the cruelest winters? Perhaps both, a tangible terror wrapped in ice, its strength a reflection of the dread that named it. In that duality lies its truest horror, a reminder that some hungers can never be sated. The Wendigo legend whispers of a creature born from starvation and greed, a spirit or beast that twists its victims into shadows of themselves, gaunt, ravenous, and no longer fully human. Now we explore documented cases where this transformation allegedly took hold, revealing manifestations so vivid and terrifying that they blur the line between myth and reality. The stories of Swift Runner and the Fiddler brothers offer a window into these supposed possessions, their details etched into history with an eerie precision that lingers like frost on bare skin. In the winter of 1878, Swift Runner, a Cree trapper in Alberta's frozen wilderness, became the centerpiece of a tale as gruesome as it was perplexing. The snow fell thick that year, burying the land in a silence broken only by the wind's mournful howl. Food dwindled until his family, his wife, 5 children, and a brother-in-law, wasted to skeletal husks, their breath shallow and their eyes dulled by hunger. Then, abruptly, the lodge went quiet. When spring traders stumbled upon the scene, they found Swift Runner alone, his clothes stained with blood, his hands trembling as he sat amidst bones stripped clean and cracked open for marrow. "The Wendigo came for me," he told the authorities, his voice a hollow rasp, his gaze fixed on something beyond the horizon. The manifestations he described were as chilling as the act itself. In the weeks before the killings, Swift Runner claimed the air grew heavy with a presence he couldn't see. The wind carried whispers, low, guttural murmurs that coiled around his ears, promising relief if he surrendered to the hunger clawing at his gut. His body began to betray him. His skin paled to a sickly gray, stretched taut over ribs that jutted like the frame of a wrecked canoe. His eyes sank into their sockets, ringed with dark bruises, and at times those who glimpsed him swore they caught a faint, unnatural gleam within them, like the reflection of moonlight on ice. His movements turned erratic, jerky bursts of speed as he lurched through the snow, leaving tracks that zigzagged without purpose. At night, he'd claw at the frozen ground, muttering about a cold that burned inside him, a frost that spread through his veins, numbing his fingers even as it stoked an insatiable craving. Dreams plagued him, towering figures with antlers branching like skeletal trees, their bodies emaciated yet impossibly tall, their mouths gaping to reveal jagged teeth dripping with frost. "Eat," they hissed in unison, their voices echoing inside his skull, or be eaten. By the time he acted, he said his family's faces had blurred, replaced by strangers' hollow stares, their flesh a taunting lure he could no longer resist. His howls pierced the night, a sound that melded human despair with the shriek of a beast, sending wolves fleeing from the woods. Even after his arrest, he shivered uncontrollably, complaining of an icy grip around his heart, as if the Wendigo lingered within, still gnawing at what little remained of his soul. Decades later, in the early 20th century, Jack and Joseph Fiddler, Algonquin shamans from Ontario's northern reaches, carved a different path through the Wendigo's shadow. Once revered for their healing rites, they turned to a grim duty, identifying and slaying those they believed had fallen to the spirit's grasp. By 1907, they had killed over a dozen people, relatives, neighbors, even children, each death justified with the same unwavering claim: the Wendigo had taken them. Their trials revealed a catalog of signs they swore marked the possessed, a litany of horrors drawn from years of vigilance. The transformation, they said, began subtly. Victims lost their appetite for normal food, their lips curling at the sight of dried fish or bannock, yet their eyes would dart toward any living thing, human or animal, with a predatory glint. Their bodies withered rapidly, skin turning ashen and clinging to bones like wet cloth, their fingernails lengthening into brittle, claw-like points. Their breath grew foul, a rancid stench like meat left to rot in the snow, and their voices deepened into a guttural snarl, punctuated by bursts of incomprehensible babble, words Jack likened to the tongue of the dead. Physical strength surged inexplicably. A frail woman once snapped a leather strap as if it were thread, her arms trembling with a force that left bruises on her captor's wrists. A boy, no older than 12, hurled a grown man into a wall with a single shove, his face blank as he did so. Their eyes changed too, pupils dilating to black pools that swallowed the whites, or, in rare cases, glowing faintly in the dark, twin embers that flickered with malice. The air around them turned frigid, even in summer. Frost would spider across nearby surfaces, and a bitter wind seemed to follow them, carrying the faint sound of snapping twigs or distant, mocking laughter. Shadows played tricks in their presence, tall, antlered silhouettes that loomed against tent walls or flickered in the firelight, vanishing when confronted. Jack described one case in detail, a young hunter named Pierre, who returned from a solo trek raving about a voice in the trees. Within days, his flesh shrank from his frame, his ribs stark against his chest, and his skin took on a waxy pallor. He'd sit motionless for hours, then lunge without warning, teeth bared as if to bite. His hands, once steady with a bow, shook with a strength that bent an iron trap in half. He wasn't Pierre anymore, Jack said, his voice low. Something looked out from behind his eyes, something old and starving. The brothers bound him, but the ropes frayed under his thrashing, and the tent grew so cold their breath hung in clouds. When Pierre spoke, it was a hiss. "You can't stop it. It's already here." Joseph drove a knife through his heart hours later, claiming the shadows retreated as Pierre's blood soaked the ground. To the fiddlers, these were not mere ravings but proof of possession, a spirit wearing human skin, hollowing it out until only the Wendigo remained. The Algonquin saw the Wendigo as a spiritual force, a punishment for taboo acts like cannibalism or greed, its manifestations a blend of the physical and ethereal. Winter was its domain. The colder the season, the stronger its pull, as if the ice itself summoned it forth. Yet science offers a counterpoint. Psychologists later termed this phenomenon Wendigo psychosis, a rare disorder marked by an obsessive urge to consume human flesh, often tied to famine-induced delirium. These were minds unmoored by hardship, a modern researcher might note. Malnutrition weakens the body, isolation erodes sanity, and the Wendigo myth gave their breakdowns a name. Swift Runner's case aligns with this. Starvation could explain his delusions, the cold a symptom of hypothermia rather than a spirit's touch. The fiddler's victims, too, might have suffered from diseases like tuberculosis or rabies, mimicking the wasting and aggression they described. Still, the specificity of their accounts, the glowing eyes, the frost, the antlered visions, defies easy dismissal, hinting at a shared cultural terror that shaped their perceptions. The Wendigo's manifestations in these tales are a tapestry of dread, bodies shriveling into grotesque parodies of life, minds fraying under a hunger that defies reason, and a world warped by cold and shadow. Swift Runner felt its icy fingers in his dreams and bones, driving him to an act he couldn't unmake. The fiddlers saw it in the blackened gazes and twisted strength of their kin, a foe they fought with blade and blood. Whether spirit or psychosis, the signs they left behind, erratic howls, frostbitten air, and a hunger that gnawed beyond death, paint a portrait of something ancient and unyielding. History records their fates, Swift Runner hanged, the Fiddlers undone by their crusade. But the question persists, what truly took hold in those frozen nights, and how close did it come to breaking through? Once a fireside whisper to make sense of survival's horrors, the Wendigo has slipped free of its icy Algonquin roots. Now it prowls the edges of our modern minds, its shape warped to reflect today's unspoken fears. Today, the Wendigo has shed its historical skin. No longer just a gaunt, decaying figure of Algonquin tales, it has grown horns in the popular imagination, its skeletal form stalking the edges of modern media. This shift isn't mere artistic license, it's a reflection of deeper fears. Where once the Wendigo embodied the terror of survival, now it mirrors the cannibalistic nature of modern consumption, greed, selfishness, and the insatiable hunger for more. In the 21st century, the Wendigo is less a creature of the wild and more a psychological specter, a shadow cast by humanity's inner darkness. Take the TV series Hannibal, which aired from 2013 to 2015. Here, the Wendigo appears not as a physical monster, but as a haunting, antlered presence, a manifestation of Hannibal Lecter's moral decay. In Season 1, Episode 10, psychiatrist Bedelia du Maurier confronts Lecter, her voice steady but edged with dread. "You're wearing a very well-tailored person suit, Hannibal, but I see the antlers behind it." The Wendigo in this moment is no longer a creature of the forest, but a symbol of Lecter's predatory nature, his hunger for control and power. This reinterpretation, rooted in psychological horror, speaks to a modern audience grappling with the masks we wear and the darkness beneath them. Literature, too, has embraced this evolution. In Stephen King's Pet Sematary, 1983, the Wendigo is a looming, unseen force, its presence felt in the decay of resurrected bodies and the corruption of grief. More recently, Nathan Ballingrud's Wounds, 2019, reimagines the Wendigo as a metaphor for addiction, its hunger consuming the protagonist from within. These depictions, while divergent, share a common thread. The Wendigo is no longer just a physical threat, but a warning about the dangers of excess, whether emotional, material, or moral. But why does the Wendigo endure? Why does a legend born in the icy wilderness of North America resonate in an age of smartphones and skyscrapers? The answer lies in its adaptability. Historically, the Wendigo was a cautionary tale for communities facing scarcity, a reminder to resist the temptation of selfishness in times of need. Today, it speaks to a world drowning in abundance. Consider the global crises of overconsumption, deforestation, climate change, wealth inequality. The Wendigo, with its insatiable appetite, feels eerily prescient. It's no coincidence that in a 2022 survey by the Pew Research Center, 68% of Americans cited greed as a driving factor in societal decline, echoing the very themes the Wendigo embodies. Yet we must approach this evolution critically. Some argue that modern depictions dilute the Wendigo's cultural significance, reducing a sacred Algonquin narrative to a generic monster trope. Indigenous scholars like Basil Johnston, in The Manitous, 1995, caution against this commodification, noting that the Wendigo's true power lies in its moral weight, not its horns. Others, however, see value in its reinvention, arguing that it allows the legend to speak to new audiences. This tension between preservation and adaptation mirrors broader debates in cultural history, reminding us that myths are not static but living, breathing stories. Ultimately, the Wendigo's modern relevance lies in its role as a mirror. It forces us to confront our own hungers, our own capacity for destruction. It reminds us that balance is fragile, that the hunger for more, whether power, wealth, or control, can consume us from within. And perhaps in its shadow, we glimpse a deeper truth. The line between civilization and savagery is perilously thin. Though it may be a legend, the Wendigo remains a haunting presence, a reminder of the darkness that lurks within us all. So as you navigate the complexities of modern life, stay vigilant. Watch for the Wendigo, not in the forests, but in the choices you make, the desires you chase. It's there, waiting. Want to explore more chilling legends and unravel the mysteries of history? Don't forget to hit that subscribe button on the Histories and Native Tales YouTube channel for more stories where myth meets the modern world.